the most common thing that people are surprised about is just how peaceful death really is. Death is not anything to be afraid of. Talking about death isn't going to make it worse. It makes it better. I've always been interested in death and dying and the rituals around it, human consciousness, sleep states, dream states, and, death is sort of an expansion of that. And when, as an anthropologist, we're trained that there are a number of different types of rituals associated with all kinds of life events. And I've always just been drawn to that end of life. And again, my own spirituality treats it as sacred and a blessing to be able to be present at that time. I'm also Jewish, and Jewish tradition has a number of rituals surrounding death where people are actively involved. There are rituals of washing and preparing dead bodies. There's a ritual of what's called being a shomer, and that is somebody who watches over the dead body after death and prior to the body being prepared. That way the soul doesn't feel like it's by itself. And I've had the honor of being able to do that for a friend of mine. And there's just this whole concept of the fact that the body may not be moving anymore, but there's a soul still with us somewhere. And I find that comforting and pretty amazing. The end-of-life practices for a death midwife allow, especially the dying person, if they're lucid, it gives them agency. And I think that's really important. When my late husband died, he had struggled with lupus for about 8 years. He willed himself to stay alive for a variety of reasons. And at the very end, he looked at me and he said, "Is it okay if I give up now?" And although it was really sad at the time, I mean, what a blessing to be able to choose when you're going to go. I've been most involved at the bedside, and also in terms of pre-planning. I think the idea of planning what you want and talking about it and letting your family know what it is that you want is really important. And it's been my experience that the person who is facing the end of their life really welcomes the opportunity to talk about what they want and what they don't want, and what they hope happens for their family after they're gone. And it's important for the family as well. I think it's more difficult for the family to have those discussions sometimes, but it's nice to know that, mom wants to be cremated. We don't have to worry about this. We know what it is that she wants. Those are important discussions to have, and death midwives can facilitate that in a way that's non-threatening.
How do midwives interact with hospice and funeral homes? What is the relationship like?
Professional and cordial. And as a death midwife, I look at hospice and palliative care and end-of-life physicians as absolute angels. And they're there to make the patient comfortable. And there's, especially with hospice, there's a lot of overlap between what a death midwife does and what a hospice worker can do or does do. The big difference is that as a death midwife, I am not trained in any sort of medical procedures at all. So I can't do anything that could be considered medical treatment or any kind of a medical procedure. So my focus is primarily on emotional support, especially towards the end, sitting and just holding a dying person's hand, trying to make them comfortable spiritually and physically. or emotionally, because at that point, the hospice workers are focused on medical issues, as they should be, and the family is focused on their loved one and also their own emotions. So we kind of serve as a bridge. And with the funeral industry, we ideally have a lot of the information about what you can and can't do, what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. From a practical aspect, a lot of us have price lists already so that we can advise the family, if they haven't already made plans, what fits within their budget, what doesn't. And they don't have to think about that, because those are really, really tough decisions at the very end, because that's not what you want to think about. You want to think about your loved one.
Do you have any knowledge on grief counselors and where they come in?
Grief counselors usually, in my experience, come in at the end, after the person has died, and they help the family go through the grief process. And whereas me as a death midwife, I have an idea of what a family might experience. And so a lot of times family, especially at the very, very end, they're not sure what's happening. Death doesn't look, in practical terms, death does not look like it does in the media. So people will ask, what is happening? What is this person still breathing? Is she in any pain? And those are the kinds of questions that I can help with, but I'm not necessarily a grief counselor. That will normally come at the end after the person has died. I think the most common thing that people are surprised about is just how peaceful death really is. It's not a whole lot of, shuddering and moaning and groaning and all of that. Most people just very quietly stop breathing. There may be some sounds, there might be some movements and things, but most of it's not terribly dramatic. It's very peaceful. A lot of times people that's not what they expect. My beliefs are that when we die, we sort of go back to our soul group, sort of regroup, and then we come back, we're reborn. So it's just this constant cycle, so that when you're seeing birth and then when you're seeing death, it's all part of the same cycle. It's not anything different. You're seeing something transition in, you're seeing that same thing transition out, and that is going to transition in again and transition out again. So it's all interconnected. It just makes sense to me. At some point, we're going to be gone, and one of the things that I want to do is I want to leave my daughter ideas and thoughts. I want her to know me as a person, not just as her mom, but as a living, breathing person who feels things and has another side to life. And death can really, and this sounds weird, but death can really help to facilitate those types of things, because when we think about our own mortality, we think about the fact that at some point we're not going to be here, and what is it that you want to leave behind for the people that are still going to be here? What do you want them to know about you? What is important to you? And that the idea of being more open about death and being able to talk about it helps to put those things in place, I think. People are just open and honest about it. Death is not anything to be afraid of. Not really. Certainly there's anxiety around it, and that's natural and normal. But talking about death isn't going to make it worse. It makes it better.